Welcome, everyone, to Coffee with Riverbend. My name is Jeremy Finger, founder and CEO of Riverbend Wealth Management. What we have here today is a wonderful panel here. We've got Travis Smythe with investment manager with Stratus Investment Management. We got Tripp Wiles with Wiles Law Firm, estate planning extraordinaire. And what we're going to do today is talk about the markets. We're going to talk about how to protect your assets. And what we want to do is to provide you some very valuable, useful information so that you can make some good decisions going forward. And we have the ability, if you can see a chat feature there, to ask questions. All right. So we're not using your camera. All right. So don't worry about that. But you can use the chat feature to ask whatever questions you may have. And what we're going to do is, as time permits, we're going to ask these questions to the panelists that might be best suited in answering them. Okay, so let's get started. This is going to last no more than an hour. I want to be real respectful of your time here. What we got here is Travis Smythe, who is certified financial analyst with Stratus Investment Management. He went to the University of Tulsa, got his bachelor's in finance, and been in the business a little while. And he's going to talk with us a little bit about the markets. We also have Tripp Wiles, graduate of the Citadel Military College of South Carolina. I've known him for a very long time because I went to the College of Charleston. It's funny how our paths crossed again after 20 some years, right? He's going to talk to us about what you can do to protect your assets, your hard-earned assets, from creditors, and making sure that you're being prudent on how to protect those assets, and those assets, how they can transfer the next generation tax efficiently as possible, and goes to who you're supposed to be going to. Okay. So Travis, let's start with you. Okay. It's been one heck of a ride here for the past 4 years. Can you maybe give us a little bit of insight on what the market outlook looks like for you?
Yeah, right now here at Stratus Investment Management, we are generally bullish on the market still. We know valuations rich. We've had a lot of run up. 2023 was an excellent year. But the underlying fundamentals underneath the market are very strong, with the possibility of earnings growth being 12%, with the possibility of Fed rate cuts coming in to add a little bit more juice to the market. We see that there's still some room to run in the current economy, even with valuations a little bit richer than they have been in the past.
Okay. When you say like earnings, the fundamentals are good, what are some of the things you look for that give you some indication that fundamentals are strong?
Just from a large scale view, a big thing that we like to focus on is the unemployment. Right now, we're still seeing that there are more jobs available than there are people looking for jobs. So that's generally a very, very positive sign for the market. It means that there should not be any kind of spike in unemployment if things stay strong. If those numbers switch and the number of unemployed individuals increases above the number of open jobs, that's a risk we see. That we're not there yet. We don't see that on the horizon. The earnings growth, basically just the net profit of every company, is growing at a pretty strong rate. That should enable companies to still operate effectively, still pay their employees, still pay back dividends and return capital to shareholders. So overall, those are kind of the big things in the economy that we're seeing. Unemployment is still strong. Earnings growth is still strong. And I didn't touch on this in the economy, but inflation has come down from the very high levels that we were seeing in the past year and a half.
Oh, yeah. Wow. So does that mean that my wife's going to complain a lot less about high prices? Is that what that means?
I'm not the one to comment on your wife's opinions of high prices.
No. I give her a lot of reasons to complain. So she says. So it's all good. It's all good. So when you say that inflation's come down, like what does that mean? Does it mean the prices are going to come down, or does it mean that the rate of price increase has slowed?
That's a great question, Jeremy. So the rate of price increases has slowed. Uh, we were getting high, like I think our 2% is our target for our Federal Reserve, just 2% price growth year over year, which is very reasonable when you consider the stereotypical wage growth. When the number is getting higher than that, it's eating into your pockets. Your money goes a lot less way than it did before. So the rate of that increase has been dropping and getting to a more reasonable level. And that in turn has allowed the consumer to keep spending, which has really been a big driver of this economy staying as strong as it has been.
Okay. Good point about the consumer. We were talking, for all you listeners, we were having a little powwow before we got started. And one of the questions that came up was, hey, is there free money? Are people getting free money and that's why things are spending? Or is the fundamentals of the economy and people, how they're doing their business, providing people with money to spend? Where's this money coming from?
Some of it has been there's a big stockpiling of money during COVID. I believe the savings rate skyrocketed at that point as people were going out and spending less, and there was in a way a lifestyle change a little bit to be a little bit more uh better with saving, and that in turn actually has led to better spending further down the line as people came out of that extreme savings scenario.
Okay,
So
so they had
go
some dry
ahead.
powder,
Mhm.
so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, we, as far as markets are concerned, of course, um, some very few companies have done extremely well. It's pushed up the market some. Can you maybe comment a little bit on maybe the concentration of returns and
Mhm.
what we may can expect from the broader market as a whole?
Yes. So right now, and it's been in the news quite a bit. Last year was driven primarily by the Magnificent Seven, seven generally tech names that just were growing exponentially. The other 493 stocks in the S&P 500 were much less of a contributor to that overall return. Going forward, we're seeing that Magnificent Seven has already shrunk to a Fantastic Four, so to speak. Those four are continuing to drive while three of the others have come back down to earth. Right now, we see that while those four are still performing tremendously, their valuations have really increased. We see a lot of potential in the 493 to 496 that are much more reasonably valued and provide a great entry point uh, to getting into this market for the long term.
Yeah. So you pretty much see that there's a broadening of potential returns potentially out there
Exactly.
for the other companies. Okay.
Mhm.
Good. All right. All right. Well, any final thoughts or comments? Now we want you to stay on because there's probably going to be some questions. But any final thoughts before we go over to Tripp and he's going to tell us what to do about asset protection?
Yeah, I will say I've been very positive. I will say there are a few things that we are keeping an eye on to make sure that we don't get caught with our hand in the cookie jar. The big thing that's very popular is the Federal Reserve's their rate cuts. The market was pricing in about 6 rate cuts, which is for the year, which was a pretty significant amount. We were forecasting at the start of the year about 3 rate cuts, and it looks like the market is really starting to catch up to that mindset. The big risk we see there is if the economy continues to perform very well, if jobs numbers continue to be very strong, if inflation does not end up coming down and we actually end up having the Fed having to hike rates higher, that is the big risk that is keeping us up at night. It's not a major risk right now, but it is a non-zero percentage chance.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the things that could possibly derail this would be if the economy is too good, right? And that the Fed realizes that they need to raise rates versus cut rates.
Yes, we're in a very strange scenario where almost bad news is good news for the markets.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So, well, thank you very much. Hey, and by the way, feel free to type your questions in the chat feature. We'll take a look at them and answer us, and do our best to answer those questions. Okay. All right. So let's pivot over to Tripp Wiles. He was born in Charleston, South Carolina, but raised in Tennessee. But you came back and went to the Citadel, okay, and graduated there. You got a firm. It's in Mount Pleasant, right, Tripp?
Sir.
Perfect. He's got a great crew there that helps guide people in protecting their assets. And so, Tripp, what are some of the things that, let's say, because all these people who are on this call are very wealthy, and in today's litigious society, what are some things that people can do to protect their assets as best way possible?
Yeah, well, really, it's interesting. Asset protection, like a lot of terms in estate planning, have a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. And so I think it's important to make sure we understand what we're actually talking about when we say asset protection.
Okay.
And then one of the good news, piece of good news with asset protection is if you're doing proper estate tax planning, it has an element of protection to it. And so most of what we're doing that's driving it is realizing that the government wants to tax you a fifth time on the same dollar. And most of my clients don't want to pay that because it's not required. There are legal ways to minimize and eliminate those estate taxes. So our philosophy first begins with the taxes in that area. I believe what the Bible says. Jesus said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's," and I also believe that we're not required to give a penny more than what's required of us. Unfortunately, if you don't do proper planning, you will end up paying more than you have to. And so I think that's kind of where it starts. And just to give you a quick history, we have very high estate exemptions right now. So you can die with $13.6 million this year and not have an estate tax. But the problem is the exemption has been as low as $675,000. And that was this century, which hasn't been that long. The tax rate on that was 55 cents on the dollar. So to me, one of the best ways to protect your assets is to make sure you don't get overtaxed at death. And a lot of the best asset protection planning you can do is really about death planning. It's making sure it gets down to not only your spouse, but the next generation. And that is the most foolproof protection you can do. I believe that the government continues to spend, the government continues to grow. And I do believe there's a possibility in the lifetime of a lot of my clients that this estate exemption will go down. And if it does, it's going to affect a lot of people. So we're big believers in doing some extra planning when it comes to estate tax planning. What we found is the best way to protect your assets, whether it's from overtaxation or from people who are trying to get your money and they don't have a right to it, through fraudulent lawsuits, car wrecks, you name it, is to protect it in such a way that you're giving it away. On the flip side of that, most of our clients, really doesn't matter the age, it really doesn't matter how much they have. They're not really interested in giving a large amount of their assets away in life. And that's because most of us like to control our assets. And so a lot of what we do is look for ways to give clients control, some tax protection, and create hurdles between them and people that want to get to their money. We would never advise protecting assets from people from legitimate claims or taxes. It's what we're talking about is overtaxation or fraudulent claims. So again, there's a tax element to it. Good asset protection and good tax planning can usually be done in one entity or one way of planning. And we have a lot of ways to do that. What I've seen a lot of people not realize is that if you keep everything in your name, there's really not a hurdle between you and those people trying to get to your money. And most people have everything in their name. I like to tell clients my philosophy on this is if you want to make it harder for the government to overtax you, get to your stuff, or a bad actor, creditor, to get to your stuff, fraudulent creditors, I should say, then you're going to have to make it a little harder for you to get to your stuff. And so it doesn't mean you can't get to it. It just means there might be some more steps you have to take. And then that's when we come in and choose, depending on a client's level of how comfortable they are with giving up a little bit of control, a lot of control, extra steps they're willing to take, maintenance they're willing to take. That's going to dictate what type of planning they do. And then lastly, I would just say the other misnomer with asset protection is if anyone ever tells you they can protect your assets fully, they can make them bulletproof. They either don't know what they're talking about or they're not being truthful, or possibly both. So asset protection is really about hurdles. It's really about how to put you in a position to settle with someone. It's not about making sure you never get sued or you never have to pay anything out.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. It's almost like putting a lock on your door, right? Yeah, it's a little bit of a deterrent.
Right.
Right. Now you still have to use your key, but you can still use it.
That's exactly.
Yeah, but it's not as easy if it was no door there, right?
Yeah. I'm stealing that analogy.
Yeah, okay, that's okay. Yeah, you're more welcome. Just just give me a little credit, just a little credit. All right. So you touched on a couple of different things in from our world. I say my world, the financial advisor and the deep financial planning world, is that when we're working with good people like you, yeah, you create the entity, let's say, and we create the accounts and put those and fund those accounts. And that's some of the hurdles. And guess what, for you listeners, we're doing the hurdles for you. All right. We're the ones that are doing the work on the back end to make sure that's the case. But one of the things you did point out there, Tripp, was that the estate tax exemption is 13.6 million, but that's per person, right? Husband and wife can give at present 26, right? 26 million.
Correct.
All right. So, what are and you kind of alluded to this because there's some sunset provisions that are happening, I guess, in 2026. Yeah, yeah, and the exemption may drop. It may, right? So what are some things that people can do to possibly as you say, not overpay on taxes?
Right. Well, the first thing they can do is just if they're married, is take advantage of both of those exemptions. And the overwhelming majority of Americans will never do that, no matter their net worth. So that is why we believe unless you actually have in your estate plan the direction to your trustee to use these exemptions, it's highly likely they will never be used. So what happens is most people do kind of a homemade way of avoiding probate court, and they title their assets with rights of survivorship. And husband dies, because guys, we go first usually. Wife gets it. She doesn't file a 706 because she's never heard of a 706, and neither had he, and neither, the overwhelming majority of people that come to my office. And so the exemption is wasted. Then the wife passes away. The kids go to the IRS and say, okay, here's dad's exemption, here's mother's exemption. The IRS says, no, you never cash dad's in. You only have your mother's. And oh, by the way, who knows? We could have a low exemption at that point. And now not only have we missed the opportunity for the exemption, we've missed the opportunity to maximize the growth because it didn't go into trust. And now mom has a small exemption and there's a tax, a hefty tax. That is a scenario that does happen. And again, most people do not use those exemptions. And that also is why we miss out on the asset protection. One of the great things about using the estate exemption in trust planning is you can set it up in such a way that even though you and your wife own these things in life, the first spouse to pass away can protect the surviving spouse. So there is an element of asset protection because it's in an irrevocable trust that even the spouse can control, but they have some protection. So the first spouse to go can, okay, not only am I protecting the assets against taxes for my future generations, I'm also putting a wall of protection or a hurdle around these assets. So in the event my wife is, heaven forbid, 90 years old and runs into someone at the grocery store, it's going to be a lot harder for them to get to this nest egg.
Would that also help in the area of second marriages as well? Like, let's say first marriages, they have you have their children, and then one spouse passes away and there's a second marriage, making sure that the assets from the first marriage go to the first generation.
Yes, that's a great point. So, statistically, the wife, if she's a survivor, she will not remarry. However, guys are 4 times more likely to remarry quickly, and remarry someone younger and then die before that lady. If there are no restrictions on that share that was left behind, then typically the new spouse is going to get it, and that new spouse may or may not leave it to your kids. Good chance they'll leave it to their kids. So
Right.
what you do is you can just say, hey, survivor, you can spend it, you can use it, but you cannot leave it to a new person. That's at the least restrictive. The other thing people miss out in that initial planning is protecting the assets from estate taxes and creditors and divorcing spouses of their children. So that is I review plans from around the country just about every week. And the tradition in my industry has been to leave assets to children in a sprinkled fashion. So you're going to get a little bit 30, a little bit 40, a little bit of 50. Our firm has never done that. We feel like it's much better to sprinkle control. So if you're concerned about the kids controlling the money, then say when they can control it, but don't take the protection away from them. So that way, the assets have a layer of protection, actually the best protection money can buy. It's not bulletproof, but it's the best protection because they didn't set it up, the parent did. And so when they get their inheritance, they have a layer of protection from divorcing spouses, from creditors, but also back to the tax issue, it's excluded from their estate for tax purposes. So again, your child may do very well over here, but you're not stacking what you earned on top of them. It's actually over here. And what that does is it helps the family wealth continue to grow and not be not only overtaxed, but taken by creditors.
Yeah, it's like 2 birds with 1 stone. But you're also it's maybe saving some money on estate taxes. Let's say, because everybody here is worth well over 13 million, right? And so you're protecting on that,
right?
And you're also distributing to the next generation in a not only a tax efficient way, but also asset protection way.
That's exactly right.
Right. Okay. Now, okay. So let's say this is in a trust and you're transferring control, but not ownership, let's say. Is this, what type of instrument is this typically? I mean,
so when we're talking about transferring things upon death, I believe the best way to do that is through a revocable living trust. Okay, so rather than a will. I'm not a big fan of wills because I believe they're outdated documents. What most people, I realized the other day, I don't say this enough. Most people who have wills don't realize that their wishes can be changed at death with a will. So not only do you have to go to court, not only are you going to have to pay more, not only are all your assets public, not only are you inviting whoever has a beef with you to come file a claim and you're going to pay for the whole thing, but also your beneficiaries can get together and do what's called a family agreement. And if you want things to go this way, they can completely change your entire wishes. That is not possible with a trust. And so I believe the best instrument is a revocable living trust. And then within that trust, providing for your spouse in a protected fashion, providing for your children, and even for some of my clients, providing for generations beyond that. That all starts with that first vehicle of the trust. Now, the only downside to the trust, the revocable living trust, is what that doesn't do is it doesn't give you any hurdles or protection pieces during life. So if you want that, that's when you have to move into other entities and other strategies, which is what we help people with.
Which is like what?
Well, we always recommend to make sure your insurances are where they need to be. And I start by telling people, when you're talking about protection for taxes and assets, you're really talking about again, not only a hurdle game, but also a cost, risk, benefit analysis. So if you don't have a will or a trust for your death or your incapacity, you're not planning for something that we know is going to happen. We have 100% chance of dying and a 75% chance of being disabled. So we know we should plan.
Right.
With asset protection, we only have a 33.2% chance of being sued nationally. I believe that statistic is much higher in the state of South Carolina because we live in an extremely litigious state that really doesn't have any limits on what you can sue for. So there's not any tort reform. Our legislature has traditionally been lobbied and run by attorneys. So that's not changing anytime soon. Our statutory protections are extremely weak. You only have $5,000 protection for your cash. You only have $50,000 protection adjusted for inflation for your home equity. So we really don't have a lot of protections, which states nearby us like Florida and Tennessee do. They have great protections. We don't have those protections. But what you've got to decide is, okay, do I think there's a chance I'm going to get sued? And if I do, is it worth it for me to pay for extra entities to deal with the maintenance? And if so, the start point is insurance. So I always recommend people make sure your car insurance is maximized, make sure that collision, all that's maximized.
Yeah.
I'm a believer in umbrella policies. I don't.
Yeah. We talked the Tripp. Okay. So you're the preacher. I guess I'm the choir here, but we got the attendees out there, right?
That's right.
And so part of the things that we absolutely do is bring up, whether all the clients listen or not, it's one thing, but it's like, hey, let's get some umbrella insurance. And typically what you want to do, okay, so let's just say you go and get umbrella insurance. Typically to have an umbrella insurance be written, you need to have certain liability limits on your car, certain things on your house, and so on. And then that umbrella, which is like, guess what? Like an umbrella that covers everything over and above. Now, a rule of thumb, and this is a conservative rule of thumb, would be you have an umbrella insurance up to your net worth, up to 20 million. And if you're worth over 20 million, then you can go something different. I think that's like a really conservative, but I try to, in as far as at least one of our progress meetings that I have with clients is go over, okay, hey, how is your insurance set up? And then making sure they have umbrella. And I think I always just try to point out to folks, for a lot of my clients, that's enough for them. They get that concern taken care of by knowing they have these insurances. And that's okay, because again, we can't guarantee someone's going to be overtaxed or someone's going to be sued. But what I do want to make sure people understand of my clients is umbrella insurance is not foolproof. So, I have umbrella insurance personally. I have life insurance personally. I trust my life insurance because I know there's one condition for it to pay out. My wife will get the money if I pass away, right? Right.
I don't trust my umbrella insurance because I've dealt with it too much. It is a bucket of money, and this is true with any liability insurance. It's a bucket of money. You hope they pay out, and you hope it covers what you did. I went to law school in Memphis. I worked for plaintiffs attorneys and dealt with insurance companies, and I know, they have not only a commitment to the client but also to the company. So if they think it's a claim that they shouldn't have to pay, then they won't. The condition on an umbrella policy is pretty ambiguous. You don't get sued and they pay a check. They have to determine whether or not they're going to cover it. And that's why I have clients who are very involved in the liability insurance industry, and they do asset protection beyond insurance. So for a lot of my clients, that's enough. But for many of my clients, they did want to do legal planning. And that's kind of the next step. So
like when we're working with somebody, okay, so you don't want to kill a mosquito with a sledgehammer, right?
Yes,
right. So there's some things you can do that, hey, base level 1, base level 2, base level 3, right? And what Tripp is talking about here is a variety of different things, and you want to kind of have the treatment for the specific disease, and at a certain level. And so if you guys, whoever's listening here, have questions about, hey, am I set up right? Feel free to reach out to us and we can relay you to Tripp, or Tripp's going to be able to share his contact information before this is over. And y'all can reach out to them directly. But yeah, that's kind of, there's some things you can do, but it's like, there's some things that are overkill as well.
That's right. And
okay. Yeah. Now,
when the insurances aren't enough, that's when we come in with other types of planning. And a lot of times that's going to be some type of LLC, some type of domestic entity planning.
Yeah. What about like foreign trust or LLCs, things like that?
Yeah. So normally when we're talking foreign, we're talking other state.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And there are some great state laws out there. Again, unfortunately, South Carolina does not have those. So we don't have what's called a domestic asset protection trust. We don't have the trust like a Tennessee or a Wyoming or a South Dakota has, or Nevada, where you can basically take your assets, put them in a trust for yourself and have protection. Actually, the national precedent on that has not been good. If you live in a state other than those states that have it, then the case law has not been very good. A lot of times they've been broken into. In our state specifically, we think that some of the top people in the state, the people that the legislature, the people that the courts listen to, at least one individual has gone on record to say those type of plans will likely not work in the state of South Carolina. So they've not been tested, but to me, that's enough to tell my client, listen, it's not wrong to do that type of planning. If you want to do that planning, that's up to you. If you do, we're going to refer you to someone that does that. When we get into protection and tax planning, we're going to do things that we know work. And so for us, if you want an irrevocable trust, it's going to be a South Carolina trust. It limits your options. It limits your control. So that's why a lot of our clients don't end up doing irrevocable trust, because they want that control. They like LLC planning. Now, where it's completely the legislature and those in the know, and even the state bar of South Carolina have a different opinion, is on the matter of foreign LLCs. In fact, the most recent manual published by the South Carolina bar, the experts in that manual, which is a very thick book, actually suggests that we use foreign entity planning rather than South Carolina LLC.
Really?
Yes. Hard as that is to believe. So why is that? Well, one reason is because our state Supreme Court has allowed creditors into our LLC years ago, over 10 years ago, and our legislature has done nothing about it. So when you have a state like Wyoming, which I'm licensed in, as well as South Carolina, if there's a problem with the LLC law, the legislature typically comes in the next year or so and fixes that problem. So if there was a bad case, the legislature comes in and changes the law. One of the reasons they do that is because LLCs were started in Wyoming. They actually got it from Germany in the 70s, 1977, and brought it to America. So they're pretty proud of that law. They improve it. And primarily the reason we use it again is for tax purposes. It's the only close CLOSE LLC in America. So you can get typically large discounts on your assets at death for state tax purposes. But also they have great charging order protection. So under Wyoming law, if someone sues you, and even if they win, the law says that you have to pay, of course, but you don't pay until you make a distribution. And so that puts you in a position of settlement, because you're able to tell the creditor, hey, I know I've got to pay you, but I'm not paying you until I take money out of this company. And that may be a while. So maybe you want to settle with me. So that's kind of the strategy. The other thing is typically attorneys don't want to have to go after out-of-state entities. There's much lower hanging fruit out there. To me, that's really what it's about. And then finally, there's ways to make it a little harder to figure out what you have. You can't make things completely anonymous, but it's been our experience, most people coming after your assets are not going to dig any further than they have to. And if they can't find what you have on the first dig, they're probably going to move on. There's a good chance they're going to move on to the next, lowest.
Yeah, they want low hanging fruit.
That's right.
So now, Tripp and Travis here, I mean, the technology must be broke because I have got 0 questions from the audience here. Can someone please ask a question just to make sure we understand that the technology is not broken? Just say chat or whatever. I mean, I'm just saying, if you ask whatever question you've got, but I'm seeing
questions, man.
what you know what it is. I think what it really is, everything's working well. Someone said, all right, which really goes to the testament. Travis and Tripp, you're saying things so precisely. It's answering all the questions. That's wonderful. So, but okay. So at what levels, Tripp, and Travis, we're going to get back to you because you've been silent for too long. Is at what level really of assets, or how do you gauge really when someone would need, let's say, irrevocable trust, or let's say a Wyoming trust, or something a little bit more advanced?
Yeah, well, I think you start with what are the protections I have under the law? And just to make it simple, and again, what we start with some of the things Travis deals with, your IRAs, your 401ks. Although a 401k was recently broken into, generally ERISA plans are protected 100%. So if you have a 401k,
ERISA plans are like 401ks, okay?
403B,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm laughing because someone asked a question. I don't know enough to ask an intelligent question. So, all right. A little bit about, I would say, and see if you're listening to this. If you're working with me, or with us at Riverbend, we're going to ask you what you've got. Okay. And we're likely are going to refer you over to a Tripp, someone like that, to make sure that they ask their questions in detail enough to make sure that you've got your stuff in order to do what it's supposed to do. Okay. Like, you don't have to know how to fix a car or know how a car works. You just know how to drive it. Right. So, so that's the main thing there. I'll say, if you didn't have anything, reach out to Tripp, or if you do have something, want to double check, reach out to Tripp, and Tripp's going to share that. Okay. That is the short answer. Okay. Yeah, that's the short answer. I'm sorry, Tripp, I interrupt you. Right?
no, I was just, and what you're saying reminds me, and I've used this definition before, but to your client's question, I think you just start with the concerns. Do you have the concerns? So we have a definition we get a lot of clients to agree to, and that is, while I'm alive, I want to control and protect my assets. And most people will say yes. If I become disabled, I want to take care of me and my loved ones. And clients say yes to that. And when I die, I want to give what I have to whom I want, the way I want, and when I want. And through all of that, life, death, incapacity, I want to save every last tax dollar, legal fee, and court costs legally possible. And so if that's our start point, then as you said, like the mechanic, we can come in and say, okay, you need a transmission. You're not interested in how we put that together. You just know this is what you need, and we help you with that. But where I start with people is, okay, how exposed are you? How are your assets exposed? And I'm telling them, with a 401k, 403B, we believe those are protected. And just like with an IRA, you can't change those things anyway. They have to stay in your name. So those things are protected. IRAs, I think, are protected. We'll say about 1.3 million of your IRAs are protected, not per account, but per person. So really, there's not anything we can do on the retirement end. Second properties have 0 protection.
Could you do a trustee IRA? Have you ever done anything like that?
But that, again, that as long as you're alive, that ownership is still in your name. So you can't change that. But second properties don't have any protection. So if you have a rental home and it's in your name, 0 protection under state law. Personal residences, our homestead. So I'll give you an example. Florida has a 100% homestead exemption. You're not going to get someone's home if they live in Florida. South Carolina has a $50,000 adjusted for inflation homestead exemption. Now
What's the homestead exemption?
that means that if, just say you're a single person and you own $1 million home and it's paid off, the creditor can take everything but $50,000 adjusted for inflation.
But 50, yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
useless. If you're married, you get up to 2 of those. So really, home equity here in Charleston, and I know in Myrtle Beach, homes are worth a lot of money, and there's a lot of equity there. And so 2 judges in South Carolina over 10 years ago said we can put our homes in LLCs. And a lot of people say, why in the world would you do anything like that? Well, I think those judges knew that our homestead exemption is pretty pitiful, and that's never been overturned. So you can put your home in an LLC, and you can also get the 4% tax break. You will have people argue, well, why would you put personal assets in LLCs? Can you do that? And my argument to that is always, that's an argument the creditor is going to have to make. If things are in your name, there's really not an argument to make.
Yeah, it's the open door versus a lock, right?
There you
Yeah,
go.
I mean, that's why you can put line of credits on homes, even if the balance is 0, things like that.
Yeah, so a lot of people, some people do what's called equity stripping. They'll take the equity out and take a lot of credit or a mortgage. And then the big thing, which affects Travis's world, is non-qualified investment accounts.
Yeah, like joint accounts, individual accounts.
Only have $5,000 protection.
Yeah.
So that's where and by the way, again, having worked for plaintiffs attorneys in law school, that's what the attorney wants. He wants cash. He wants you to be able to settle today and write a check.
Yeah, they want path of least resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes sense. A question was someone asked this. They have an LLC that was set up in the state of South Carolina. Are there different LLCs that provide more protection?
Yeah, so for most of our clients who have day-to-day business, CPA, a storefront, I've got no problem with using a South Carolina LLC because it's been my experience that most business owners are taking the extra cash and equity out of that business, and that's what they buy their things with, right? That's what they buy their home with, that's what they invest with. So usually people aren't using them to protect those assets. They're just using them as their day-to-day business. Yes, there are better states. As I mentioned before, South Carolina LLC to me does not have a lot of protection. If you don't take my word for it, take the South Carolina bar's word for it. The other problem I run into is I see people use single member LLCs and they think they have asset protection. I can go through that real quickly. The history of the LLC real quick is partners saying, hey, if we're going into business together, I don't want your creditors to be my creditors. So we have an LLC. We do an LLC.
Right.
The single member LLC evolved out of that. But the problem with that is you don't have that argument. You can't say, well, my creditors are not my creditors. It doesn't work. And so that's why so many have been broken into through the years. That happened in Wyoming. In Wyoming passed a new law that said, okay, single members have as much protection as multi-members.
Okay, so in your very, very good information here is like, hey, how is your business set up? How are you owning individual things? So many times as a holistic financial planner and what we do here at Riverbend, a client will see that their accounts are doing great. Oh, I don't need to review. I don't need to ask the question or whatever. Mm-hmm. What they don't know, or what I hope they know, is that you're telling me a tremendous amount of information that I know a lot of. And then the client who just said, I don't understand enough to even ask the question. Yeah. But when we're having review meetings, about your accounts, we're also asking questions of how you own stuff, what the cost basis of that stuff is. Right. And all of that information, and whether you know it or not, I say you being the client, know it or not, I'm trying to disseminate what potential dangers there could be down the road as things change, and try to neutralize those potential problems before they come about, right? And pull in professionals like yourself to come in and help them. So, and guess what? Tripp is the rules change.
Yes.
Right. So it is constantly navigating the finances with Travis, because Travis, that stuff changes all the time, right? And then also with law and the rules of how you have things structured. And also, hey, guess what? Rules change on tax, rules change on, sometimes with Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and these other types of things. And so when we are doing reviews for people, I say reviews, progress meetings, and we're updating our information, we're looking at the universe out there and saying, hey, based on the rules today and the anticipated changes that happen, are you positioned properly for the future?
Yeah.
Okay. So the easy way, I'll just say, you ever seen that commercial with the easy button?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. The easy button, ask Riverbend. Just ask it. And we're going to put you, if we can help you, great. If we can put you in front of a Tripp, great. If we can put we can do a 3-way call with Travis and his team, we'll do it. Because what we cannot do for you is help you live your best life. All right. Like when you're out there spending time with your kids or your grandkids, or you're traveling the world, that's the only, you can only do that. Okay. So okay, we got some more questions here. All right. I'm in the state of North Carolina, or North Carolina asset protection rules different or problematic as problematic as South Carolina. Can you speak to that, Tripp?
Briefly, I mean, I'm not licensed in the state of North Carolina, but I know the protections aren't that too far off from South Carolina. However, South Carolina, I love South Carolina. I live here. But South Carolina is the state that has been named for one of the worst judicial systems in America, not because we have terrible judges, not because we have terrible courts, we don't, but because our lack of limits on awards. So the Chamber of Commerce, for at least the last 10 years in America, has put us at the bottom of the list as far as places to do business when it comes to the court system. And that's why the Cato Institute recently had an article and said the biggest travesty from the Murdoch trial was what that firm was able, or what went on in that county because of the state law, because they were able to get so many large awards. Just over and over and over, you have the Americans for Tort Reform Association has also really railed against our state law. So I don't think, to my knowledge, North Carolina has that going on.
So in other words, if we're last, they're probably better than that.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
But Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina don't have the best protection. The closest states that have the best protection to us are Florida and Tennessee. And I think that is one of the big reasons for that is their legislatures are run more by businessmen than attorneys. So that's why you don't have state income tax. That's why you have homestead protections and domestic. Florida just recently passed a domestic asset protection trust like Tennessee. To my knowledge, North Carolina does not have that.
Okay. Yeah. And by the way, you know who you are who asked that question. If you want me to double check, we can double check it. Okay. So happy to do that. Now, Travis, we went over a lot of information as far as asset protection and setting up structures. And we talked a little bit about interest rates, market outlook, valuations, and potentially like some things that could happen that could derail that, which would be slowing in earnings, or guess what? The economy is still doing too well and they're having to raise interest rates. What else that might be out there that we might be thinking about as investors and as clients?
Right now, just a few kind of things to think about, both possibly positive and negative. And on the positive front, artificial intelligence has been a really hot button topic. That could be something that really redefines not just investing, but the world at large. So that is something we're keeping an eye on as a possible driver of really growth and evolution in the way we live our lives.
Yeah.
Some things that we see as potential headwinds, geopolitics with Israel and Hamas and Russia and Ukraine. That's front and center. There's a lot of struggles happening in China that we need to be aware of. We don't have too much exposure to China just directly, but second largest economy in the world, that bears watching. And something I think a little bit more near and dear to everyone's hearts in the US, presidential election this year. We're keeping an eye on that and any developments. But right now, we feel like we're kind of in a back and forth period of up and down, but we're starting to climb out of it to go to a longer up period. So overall, we see some risks, things to be mindful of, good and bad, but are ultimately hopeful that things are on the right track.
Perfect. A little, let's say election year, is there anything in particular that you do differently in your world for election year?
We may shift our kind of sector exposure around a little bit, just based on probabilities of candidates getting elected and winning, either left or right. We may shift a little bit, but overall, my philosophy is, and I think I speak for the firm at large here, we're not really trying to time the market in this kind of situation. My favorite phrase is, it's not about timing the market, it's time in the market. Really, there's going to be some ups and downs, but if you stay long term, if you stay focused on the plan that Jeremy and his partners are work with you on, that's the best possible scenario you can take.
Okay, so I'm reading another question here. Right. And so what I hear you saying is that you're not going extreme one way or another in anticipation of one thing, although you may tilt one way or another to maybe take care of nuances that may transpire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. All right, perfect. A little bit about AI, in my opinion. Okay. So this is me. This is Jeremy Finger here speaking here. Is that I think everybody on this call remembers when the internet came out. Okay. And it was, a bunch of, I'm going to use my words, but a bunch of young kids like me being on the internet. I was on Prodigy back in the day and whatever, and didn't know what, just use email very sporadically. And that's Internet 1.0, let's say. And then businesses got in it again, that's more robust 1.0. Internet 2.0 is when social media transpired. You got Google searches, Facebook, all that other stuff that we got now. The 3.0 of that, I think, is where AI will be. So, like even today, although it was very resistant, my wife would ask, I'm going to say that I've got one of these devices in front of me and I don't want to say the name, and ask that, set a timer this, set a timer that. What the more intelligent those tools are, the better we're going to be able to be and more efficiently. Hey, give me my, read me the top 3 emails, or guess what? Better yet, just only show me the emails I want to see. And they will know that based on your habits and what your interests are. So the efficiencies that we got by using Amazon, the efficiencies that we got using Google searches, and the efficiencies that we got of sending emails versus sending snail mail, we're going to have those types of advances, I feel, in the future as AI advances. Now, I don't believe there's going to be a Terminator 2 and things like that, the world coming to an end, with this stuff. I believe there's going to be advances in tools to make our life better and more useful. I'll get off my soapbox. So, any other questions out there? Any other questions? All right. Parting shots, Travis. Parting shot.
Parting shots right now. Things are priced for perfection or near perfection, but we see the underlying supporting. As long as things are going good, don't freak out. And when things are going bad, just take a look at your plan. We're taking a look at your investments in the background to make sure that we're positioning ourselves for any unknown scenarios that pop up sporadically throughout time.
Perfect. And what we do for you guys is making sure that you got enough protection as far as stuff in cash and planning, because we kind of know your overall picture. Okay. Tripp, parting shots. What's one thing you want to make sure people take away from this?
Yeah, I would just say I would encourage people to plan. We know that over 68% of Americans don't plan. And we also know that most of the plans out there that people have are outdated, many times when they actually sign the documents, believe it or not. So I would encourage people to do the planning and think about the consequences of not doing the planning. What happens if you don't do the planning? And then finally, value the planning. Realize what this actually means. The average home in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina is $1 million. And people will pay 6% to sell that home to real estate agents, which they earn, they should get paid. But people aren't willing to pay a tenth of that to transfer all their assets in a proper plan. And so just realize when you go into this is what you're doing. You're transferring everything you've ever owned your entire life, or possibly protecting it in life. And I can promise you, if you do it the right way, it's worth it. I just encourage you to sit with a good attorney and make sure you do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so I'll say this, and this is a very, obviously my opinion. When people are really having the right people, are committed to having the right people in play to make sure that their stuff is protected, either through income, investments, assets, transfer, their taxes with their CPA, and they have good team. That's what we aspire to do, is to pull together a good team for clients. It gives them a sense of comfort. At least that's what our intent is, so that they can go out and do all those things, those wonderful things that only they can do. Does it cost a little bit to do that? Yeah, it does, but guess what? There's a reason why it does, and so you're talking about spending, a little bit to make sure that you can live your best life and without worry or burden. That's the good stuff. So, all right. Any other final questions? Going once, going twice, making sure. Tripp, Travis, thank you very, very much for your time and your expertise. For all the listeners out there, if you got questions that come to mind after this call, feel free to reach out to us at Riverbend. And I thank you for your time. And hey, y'all have a great, blessed week. Okay.